the film festival came about because when Margaret Pomeranz and I decided we'd had enough 28 years of doing At the Movies on the ABC, our producer came to me and suggested that might be nice to do a program about my responses, not a history of Australian cinema, but my responses to some of my favourite Australian films. And that gradually evolved into what has now become two things. There's going to be a three-part television series later in the year on the ABC. But right now there's a cinema version which opens tomorrow in limited cinemas around the place. And it's been directed by a New Zealand called Sally Aitken, who I must say I'd never met before. I'd seen a couple of her documentaries before we embarked on this. She hadn't seen too many Australian films, so we had to get her up to speed on that, but she did a great job there. And I think she's done a wonderful job teasing out aspects of my life coming to Australia from England as a young man.
Where you'd already discovered movies and a love of movies?
I had, as a very small child, thanks to my grandmother. I think I was probably a film buff at the age of about 4.
Since the early 60s, I think it was, you've watched a movie every day.
I've tried to. It's an aspiration, not always something I can achieve. I've been doing this national tour with this documentary, and I'm afraid I've missed out on 1 or 2 days.
Will you make up for that?
I will try very hard.
Just to keep the stats exactly the same?
I will try hard, yes.
Do you watch a particular time of day?
No, whenever it's possible. I mean, sometimes I go to a preview of something that I'm going to have to review for The Australian. Sometimes I'm catching up with something I've never seen before, and I'll watch it in my home cinema at home.
And your incredible filing system?
Well, it's an incredibly old-fashioned filing system.
Oh, no, I thought that is just magnificent. Just explain it for the listeners.
It's basically by directors. So I have all the major directors, and some you'll never have heard of, and they all have their own card system. All their films are listed, references to when I saw their films, references to whether I have a DVD copy of their film, that sort of thing. It's all there on a card system.
It was wonderful to see the card system, because you don't see that anymore, which is probably a shame, but it just looked so full of history and so inviting.
And people tell me, you could put that on computer, but it wouldn't be the same, would it? You wouldn't be able to pull out the drawer and look under W and find Peter Weir.
Who is your favourite Australian director? Is it Peter Weir?
Peter Weir would certainly be one of them. There are a number of great Australian directors, I think. Rolf de Heer would be another. Gillian Armstrong's made some wonderful films. Yep. Phil Noyce. I mean, we've been blessed with an extraordinary number of great filmmakers and actors in this country, and cinematographers. I mean, really, given the size of the population, it's amazing what we've achieved over the last 40 years.
Then why the fascination, and when did it start with Australian movies?
Again, I was very lucky. I got the job of director of the Sydney Film Festival. I was offered that job when I was 26. And it just happened that then, in the second half of the 1960s, Australian cinema was starting to get going. To begin with, just short films. So people like Peter Weir and Phil Noyce and Fred Skepsey and others were making short films which they were submitting to the Sydney Film Festival. So I got to meet these guys right from the very beginning. And then when Peter made his first feature film, The Cars de Paris, I showed that. When Fred Skepsey made The Devil's Playground, I showed that. And so I was sort of there from the ground floor, as it were. And in 1975, I had a big retrospective of Australian films, the first we'd ever done in Australia. And then I wrote a couple of books about Australian films. So I've sort of been there, from the start of the Australian new wave. Talking Melbourne.